This podcast is intended for investment professionals only. All investing involves risk.
Hello and welcome to a very special edition of the Legal General Mastertrust Trustee Talks. I'm Kim Brown, Head of Mastertrust and IGC, and I'm delighted to be joined by the Chair of our Trustees, Robert Waugh. Robert's now celebrating his first year as Chair of Trustee with us, and I'm delighted to be having a chat with him about some of his highlights and challenges and kind of ambitions for the future. Before we dive straight into that, Robert, perhaps you could let me know your thoughts on the role of the Chair and what drew you to it.
Sure. So I think we have a fantastic fiduciary system in the UK where we have a system of trustees, particularly on the Mastertrusts, whose role it is to look after the member. That means that even if you've got £10,000 saved in a pension fund, you've got some professional people looking out for your interests and not just a provider doing what a provider wants to do with no oversight. And that's why the trustee model is so clever. And I think, the role of the trustee and the chair is really to look at everything from black swans to grey rhinos.
Excellent. My first Robert metaphor or interesting phrase. For those that don't speak Robert Waugh, could you explain to me what a black swan and a rhino are?
So black swans this comes from Taleb's book. And in Victorian England, we believed all swans were white because we'd only ever seen white swans until someone went to Australia and found a black swan. And we have a general human condition of believing only things that have happened to date. If it hasn't happened, it can't happen, which in investment terms can be a huge problem. We hadn't seen a pandemic like COVID, for over 100 years, so no one's thinking about it in their risk registers, and then it comes and gets you. And there are always things that happen that you don't expect to happen. The advent of AI is. And so I guess our job as trustees is to try and think about the things that haven't happened but could happen, that could hurt us. And the grey rhinos are those enormous things in the middle of the room that everyone's ignoring, but are incredibly important. So in pensions world, that's things like adequacy. Are people saving enough? Are they actually going to be able to retire? Can they retire and live outside of poverty? There are things like pension equality. It's no point in just looking at the average pot. What about the fact that women's pots are half the size of men's pots on average? What about the fact that ethnic minorities have smaller pension pots? And all of that goes back to financial education. Actually, in schools, we're not teaching kids what they need to learn to understand about finances to be able to manage their lives.
That's really interesting. I think you come to us when you join the board with over 35 years experience in pensions and investment. I've certainly felt the benefit of that working with you. You set out a number of issues that we face in the industry there. How have you decided where to focus your efforts? And looking back at your first 12 months, are there any particular highlights for you on what's been achieved?
So I don't think one should come in with a plan. One should come in with an objective. And the objective is to make our members better off in retirement. And therefore, your plan should come from how do you achieve that objective. And to make people better off in retirement, they need a mix of things. They need more money. There are 3 ways they can get more money. They can save more, they can save for longer, or they can get better returns. It's only really the third of those that we can heavily influence. We can kind of help with the first with things like auto-enrollment and auto-escalation. So where people get a pay rise, they put more money in their pension. But really better returns is key there. And then we need to help them realise that money better. So, one of the areas we've been focusing on is when people reach the age where they work less, how do we make sure that they draw that pot down at a rate that gives them the best opportunity to have the best retirement they can. At the moment, we're not doing a good enough job as an industry in that area. So let me give you another Robertism. So when I was young, my grandmother used to give me £5 for my birthday. This involved my grandmother writing a cheque, buying a card, buying a stamp, putting the cheque in said card stamp, sending it to me opening it up, getting the cheque, going to the bank, paying it in, and then I had £5 to spend. Now I can send my children £5 in a matter of 4 clicks. The pensions industry is somewhere between those two, and it needs to get to the 4 clicks.
Excellent. So a key priority sort of looking forwards then, certainly that digitalisation of what we do and sort of helping members along the journey of saving?
So, helping members along the journey of saving, but also helping along the decision-making of when they get to the stage to start drawing those savings. But also, the first point we were talking about enhancing returns, that was really the first thing this year. So if you look at one of the things we've done this year on the back of the triennial review of our investments is we've taken everyone out of who was in a product that has now become outdated and put them into a newer product. And that's one of the most important things we've done this year because that was about 30% of our membership.
And another thing I know that you've been focusing on in the board and you've got a history and experience of looking at is private market investing. I wonder if your views on the kind of benefits of that from the members' perspective.
Sure. So, I mean, the government's obviously pushing private market from the perspective of getting more capital into the UK economy, which may suit the government. As a trustee, my concern is maximising the return for my members. And therefore, we're interested in doing private markets only where it's going to either give us more diversification or better returns. And the main thing it does give you is more diversification. You know, if you think about investing in the whole economy, there's a large amount of the economy that is not listed on public markets. So when we say private market, we're talking about anything that isn't basically quoted on the stock market or traded in some market around the world. And therefore, there are some very interesting investment opportunities there. So some things we've been looking at, investing in social housing across the UK. We know the Labour government has a plan to build 1.5 million homes. We've been investing in university spin-outs, which is really interesting because, you know, if you look at the VC area, you know, the very high returns have been made on the west coast of America in venture capital, less so elsewhere. And that is because we need to take the ideas out of our universities and then grow them into big businesses. And the trouble in the UK is often we've taken them out of the universities and then we've sold them to foreign owners too early on in the process. And I think the other area where there's huge opportunities for return and to benefit the economy is in the climate transition. So investing in renewable energy, investing in the electricity infrastructure in the UK that needs to be heavily improved before we can actually move to a net zero economy.
I think, returns and potential returns for savers is such a key driver. I think the other potential benefit of private market investing is the member engagement opportunity and how we can describe the real life impact for members of where their pensions are invested. So last year, Legal General did a survey of our DC members and asked them their views on illiquid and private market investing. Asked like that, I think we lost everyone's interest. Reframing the question and explaining it relates to, as you were describing, Robert, affordable housing, clean energy. That's when people perked up and were interested. And we found that 3/4 of those that responded, so 72% of DC members, would pay higher fees to invest in infrastructure that supported renewable energy sources such as solar panels and wind farms. So I think that's really interesting insight into people's views and how you can perhaps use the opportunity of private market investing and sort of real world impact to, show people the impact pensions can have on the world around them, their everyday life.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think there have been good examples of people investing in city infrastructure to rebuild cities outside of London. We've become a far too southeast dominant economy in the UK, and we need to broaden our skill set across the UK to make sure that other cities can grow as fast as London can draw in people. We've got some great universities, we've got a fantastic graduate outtake, and we need to make the most of that resource and turn that into growth for the economy, because without growth we can't solve our NHS, we can't solve our social issues either. There's just not enough fiscal headroom to do anything if we can't get some productivity through, and that's productivity per head, not just bringing more people in doesn't solve the problem. We've got to increase productivity per head.
Yeah. It's been a big week, or a big fortnight really, for pensions. Our new government and the introduction of a pensions bill in the King's Speech, and then very recently the Chancellor's announcement of a pensions review. What are your thoughts on what these things could be and what they could mean for pension savers?
Well, I think it's really interesting to see the new government's agenda. It's really pleasing to see that they are building on the last government's agenda rather than, as often is the case, they rip it up because they didn't invent it and start all over again. We have trillions of pounds saved in pensions in the UK, and most of them are either invested in gilts or in overseas equities. It's great to see them focusing on adequacy. It's really important that people save the right amount for their pension so that they can enjoy their later life. It's great that they're focusing on consolidating pots, because people are ending up, as they move jobs, with lots of small pots. And what we really need to do is make it simple. And hopefully when the dashboard comes in place, we'll make it really simple to consolidate pots so that people can put them into the best performing fund and we create more competition. Sadly, very few people move their pension funds around. And in the long term, that will mean fewer larger schemes, which gives you more ability to invest in more things, particularly around private markets and other asset classes, which gives you better buying power, which gives you lower fees. It is staggering in a sense how successful the current defined contribution pension industry has been since auto-enrolment. You are paying for a Mastertrust typically less than 0.5% all-in fees. So even if you've got £10,000 saved in your pension, you're paying less than 0.5%, even if you've got £1,000. If you go to a wealth manager or an IFA, you cannot get your investments managed for less than 1.5%. So it's really interesting. It's the inverse of what you'd expect. People with large sums of money are paying far more to get their money managed than people with small sums of money. The compounding effect of that extra 1% return that you're not paying in fees over 40 years can be 60, 70%. I mean, it's absolutely phenomenal to your end savings and then your quality of life in retirement. So there's a great product out there. We need to put more money into it as individuals to make sure that we've got enough for when we retire. And then our job as Mastertrust trustees is to help people through that journey, to help them make the right decisions on what pace they spend that money when they get to that stage of their lives.
Yeah, I agree. The focus on value, fewer, better run schemes, and as you said, the kind of price point and what that can do on member outcomes over a prolonged period. And then the adequacy focus, again, I think is really important. Particularly, you mentioned at the beginning kind of pension inequalities and what that could do to help address some of the pension gaps we see. So we've done a bit of a look back, just now moving to today and moving forwards. What's your view on the DC market currently and where you think you see that developing?
So I think we're at phase 3. Phase 1 was sort of the rewriting of the rules. Phase 2 was getting the regulation up and running. And phase 3 is now the competitive thing where I think I described it recently when we were in the middle of the Euros. We finished the heats. We're in the knockout round now, So there have been a lot of players in the heats, and we're going to have less players now as we get into knockout rounds. And that means the players who are left have to get better. The cost of playing, as in the Euros, is now hundreds of millions of pounds. You have to invest in your systems. You have to invest in your member journeys so that they can easily move their money from build phase to drawdown phase where they're actually starting to spend some of it. You adjust their investments with that. You have to use AI because that's the only way you can afford to do it on the sort of fees we're charging for those who can use AI. And you've then got to provide a very personal service for your vulnerable customers who need it. And all of that is going to cost money, and therefore size will help people in that sense.
Great. Thank you. It's been so interesting talking to you about a plethora of pensions related things. I wonder if you'd be happy to, just sort of talking outside of work for a moment, share a few things about you, Robert. What are you particularly interested in? Hobbies, interests when you're not thinking about pensions and investing?
Well, I have a big family, so that takes up a fair amount of my time. Apart from that, I do the things most people do at my age. I go to the gym, I do spin, I play bridge, and I read a lot.
Amazing. Any book recommendations then for our listeners?
Well, it depends what you're interested in. If you're listening to the podcast, I'm going to assume you have some interest in finances. I just recently finished The Psychology of Money, which I thought was didn't agree with all of it, but I agree with about 95% of where it was going. And I think if you want a simple, easy read on how to run your money, it's a fantastic book to read and think about. If you're thinking about how to spend your money, Die with Zero, which I read last month. It's a very interesting book about the concept that you should have nothing left at the end. If you want to give it away in your life. It didn't really cover the point that you don't know how long you're going to live, which is the main problem with that theory, but apart from that, interesting to think about. If you're more interested in fiction, then The Tin Nose Shop was my favourite read of the summer, a book about the doctors and artists, interestingly, who rebuild people's faces after the war, literally through giving them masks so that they could return into society. A very moving and good book. And then currently I'm reading Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance.
Great recommendations, none of which are on my bookshelf today, so I'll look into those. So before we head off for a spin class together, Robert, I'll thank you for coming on the podcast and talking to me today.
Thanks, Kim.
And thank you all for listening. If you want to hear more from our trustees, do please check out our Trustee Talk section on the Mastertrust website. And if you're newer to workplace pensions, please do explore Legal General's award-winning podcast series, A Little Bit Richer with Kia Commodore. And you can find that on any of the platforms that you access your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
As a reminder, this podcast is intended for investment professionals only and shouldn't be shared with a non-professional audience. The views expressed in this podcast are those of Legal and General Investment Management Limited, as at the date of publication. This podcast is for information purposes only, and we are not soliciting any action based on it. The information discusses general economic, market or political issues and/or industry or sector trends. It does not constitute research or investment, legal or tax advice. It is not an offer or recommendation or advertisement to buy or sell securities or pursue a particular investment strategy. Assumptions, opinions, and estimates are provided for illustrative purposes only. There is no guarantee that any forecast made will come to pass. No party shall have any right of action against Legal & General in relation to the accuracy or completeness of the information contained in this podcast. Where this document contains third-party information, the accuracy and completeness of such information cannot be guaranteed, and we accept no responsibility or liability in respect of such information, not for distribution to any person resident in any jurisdiction where such distribution would be contrary to local law or regulation. Copyright 2024. Legal & General Investment Management Limited is authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. In Hong Kong, this material is issued by Legal & General Investment Management Asia Limited, regulated by the Hong Kong Securities and Futures Commission. For full terms and conditions, please visit our website. To find more content, you can check us out on X, formerly known as Twitter, LinkedIn, and our website.